All right, here we go. So we are picking up with a quick review of Roman numeral 6, and then we're going to take it from there and see how far we can get working through the syllabus. So we discussed that there are brachot, right? Blessings. These are like the building blocks of Jewish liturgy. I guess the sort of tautological definition of a bracha, a blessing, is it starts with Baruch atah Hashem, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam. It addresses God by name and defines God as the Baruch atah, right, in the second person singular, in a very direct, intimate address to God. We're the ones blessing God, and then we pivot to a third person, okay, a little more distant, Eloheinu, melech haolam, our God, and the sovereign, the king of the universe, and then that's the building block of Jewish liturgy. Like our prayers are built out of, the core of Jewish prayer, morning, evening, and afternoon is the chain of 19 blessings, and before and after many mitzvot, we recite blessings. We also recite blessings after eating and before eating. We recite a blessing, a grace after meals after eating. That's in the Torah itself. You shall eat and be satisfied and bless. In the book of Deuteronomy, the big sin in the book of Deuteronomy is to become haughty and complacent in our luxurious lifestyle and abundance, and to think that Torah's language, that I did this all, I built it myself, and that's the great one of the great sins of the book of Deuteronomy. And so we bless God and thank God and show gratitude after we eat. And so we say blessing after we eat. Such a way to say blessing before we eat, the Talmud tells us. And so there's a blessing before every food we eat and a after blessing as well for following the food we're eating. And we think we talked a little about some of the rules, right? It's a sort of whole Jewish taxonomy of foods, from simple to more refined. There's some good. I used to have these like booklets I used to give out. I think they're out of print anymore now, but there are websites, all sorts of great websites of like Guide to Blessings, which I think the NCSY produces, probably a website now. Let's see, Guide to so it looks like they still are. It looks like it still is, and still. I looked at NCSY Guide to Blessings, and it seems like they're still selling it. These little booklets. I'll show it to you. I'll show you. It's a very. I strongly recommend it. I'll put a link in the chat. Okay. They're great. You can carry them around. They tell you the blessing before, the blessing after, any type of food. Okay, and we talked about that. The lab break, we talked about this last time, I believe. Other benefits as well. There's other benefits as well. So smelling fragrant things, which is a blessing, and so those are other benefit blessings. There are also blessings of praise. So Asher Yatzar is a blessing we say after using the toilet. It's slightly longer. You may take a few moments, few occasions, a few months, weeks, I don't know, saying it regularly before it's memorized, and you can say it more fluently. But it's a beautiful blessing that acknowledges that, like it's just, and if you ever have had an illness or know someone close to someone who has, the fact that things that are closed stay closed, or things that are open stay open, and like there's a tremendous a real miraculous kind of occurrence that we don't want to take for granted, right? And you take for granted until you don't, and then when you don't, it obviously things go wrong really quickly in a really bad way. So that's Asher Yatzar. Okay, these are all in your Siddur, all in your prayer book, and I again not going to belabor. I believe we discussed last time. Oseh Maaseh Breshit is a blessing of saying like particularly beautiful trees or beautiful sights. And if you look in the prayer book, you'll see all sorts of blessings for all sorts of like occurrences, lightning, thunder, okay, seeing a rainbow. There are various blessings we say. It's a way to kind of sort of take the moment, the feeling of awe or fear of encountering something really significant in nature, and kind of like elevating it, to a to like giving it a religious orientation, putting it in a religious framework, okay, saying that this is part of my normative relationship with God, and this feeling I'm having, I'm channeling in that direction. And so all the blessings, right? The blessings before and after food, the blessings of these natural phenomena that cause awe and that we're praising God for. Okay, so those are like two different categories of blessings of praise, which I would say, and then blessings of benefit, right? Before and after benefiting from the world, we say a blessing. And then the third category, not in this section, is blessings that we say before we perform certain ritual mitzvah, right? And that's a way to make sure that we engage in the mitzvah with the kavanah, with the intention that we're doing it as a form of serving God, and not for, right? Like we're lighting Shabbat candles, lighting Hanukkah candles, hearing the Megillah read, okay, on Purim, okay? These are ritual mitzvot that we say blessings before we perform them. And so we're setting Hallel on Hanukkah and on Rosh Chodesh, okay? It's a verbal mitzvah, but before we're just going to say the words, we're going to say a blessing before. Questions, comments? Okay. I think this is like a kind of I don't know if it's a unique. I think it's the spec. This is a unique element of Jewish spirituality. I think particularly Orthodox Jewish spiritual practice to say brachot before and after foods and before these natural phenomena. I think it expresses something really wonderful that like everyday life can be elevated through in this religious way, right? I mean, that's just taking a little tangent here, right? Like all animals have to eat in order to survive, right? And the sort of the natural functioning of our bodies is like just we share it with every animal. So there's nothing, okay? And this was a source of real embarrassment to the ancient Greeks that we were, we sort of depended on the same basic animal functions as the animals. And the Greek response to the, so the Greek response to this was to kind of invest in a whole system of etiquette, that the meal would be elevated, it would be a symposium, and you would talk about philosophy, and you would have certain courses, right? And cuisine really is also a way to kind of elevate this animal function and turn it into a piece of culture. Like I'm expressing my cultural identity by eating these certain foods, cooked and prepared in a certain way, right? Eating, in the fellowship of my, others who share my cultural background, according to the laws of etiquette of my culture. I'm using chopsticks, or I'm using a fork and knife, or I'm whatever I'm doing, okay? I think this Jewish approach is to really elevate it really to like, I think a level beyond where it's not just, animal and then cultural etiquette, table manners, but it's actually like a religious moment, okay? We're sort of elevating these animal functions and making them into like parts of our, like building blocks of our relationship with God, because these are occasions when we say bracha. So I think that's actually, it's a small thing, but it's expressing something about like a Jewish religious stance that I think is significant. Okay. Next. Roman numeral 7, laws of Nida. I'm not going to teach that in this class. If you want to study it, my wife teaches those classes, and she probably, if you're a member of she does like one class per calendar year for the shul, which is free to shul members, and she, and for modest fee for non-shul members. She's also available for private tutoring for individuals or for couples. And if you're so that's available. And, if you're studying this material as part of a conversion curriculum, then you should, find out, try to schedule that class with her. She's a very good teacher. I think it's be worth your while. Okay. But I also gave one book that is pretty good. Next, Jewish philosophy. Okay. Jewish philosophy, again, because Ben really, the whole course could be, the whole year could be just Jewish philosophy. We're going to try to kind of talk about some of these positions. Jewish philosophy is really, really broad. There are multiple, I mean there are multiple Jewish opinions about most of the questions. And in fact, maybe Jewish thought or Judaism is really like a conversation around these questions with a common set of books that we're arguing about. Okay, so it's a commitment not to any one answer. It's a commitment to being part of a conversation. So as we go through these topics, I'll try to say a range of parameters and maybe share a little bit about my own, where I fall out within some of these frameworks. Okay, so let's dive in. Okay, who is God? Okay, so there's a rationalist kind of trend in Judaism that's exemplified by Maimonides, who says we can't really use human language to speak about God, right? How could you? I mean, just think about it from our own perspective. You use the word big to describe a coffee mug and use the word big to describe a mountain. It's kind of silly to use the same word to describe something as vastly different as a coffee mug and a mountain, even though they're both, it's a big cup of coffee, it's a big mountain, right? There's really, I mean, so any adjective that we can use to describe God that we also use to describe like phenomena that exist in the universe, it's really, even more ridiculous than using the same word to compare a mountain and a mug. And so what Maimonides says ultimately is that all we can say about God is like negative attributes. You can say God is not small, God is not weak, okay? And the negative attributes define God. Further, Maimonides says that for God to be one and unique and non-physical, or God's unity and God's non-physicality are kind of linked philosophically. Anything with a body is by definition divisible. And so if God is whole and indivisible, then God can't have a body. And furthermore, if God is perfect, then God can't be changed, Maimonides says, right? Because if something changes, that means it wasn't perfect before, which means that for Maimonides, God can't have desires. God can't, again, it's sort of an anthropomorphism and a really like, talk about God wanting or being happy or angry, right? These are all, for Maimonides, pretty gross anthropomorphizing, right? We're sort of making God in an idolatrous way in our own image. It's like a big man in the sky with a long white beard. That's no different than worshiping a statue of a cow, right? It's a form of a creature, of a creation that we're kind of worshiping and imagining God. So God can't be moved by our prayers. God can't be, happy through our mitzvah, right? God can't be sad, when we disappoint him. These are all like gross anthropomorphic kind of ways of describing God to Maimonides and the rationalist trends. And Maimonides, he describes this all in very compelling ways. So that sort of speaks to you like it's a very kind of austere, vision of pure monotheism. Some ways very compelling, some ways can be a little bit cold, right? There's another trend, which, in Jewish tradition, which, is comfortable with sort of seeing God in more human form. Seeing the Torah, after all, says humanity was created in God's image. And so maybe it's okay to like look at ourselves and sort of see how we might be, God might be not all that different from us. And there's a trend that sees God as having emotions and God is moved by our prayers, et cetera. And that's certainly, the Torah describes God as a character to who's more like that. And maybe years ago, somebody, a classmate of mine in yeshiva said to me that he realized that it's more important for him to have a vibrant, live prayer life, religious life, spiritual life, than to have a philosophically defensible understanding of God. And so he prioritized having a relationship with a God who can be compassionate and can feel, even though he couldn't necessarily justify that type of God philosophically, since he's inspired by the Rambam, by Maimonides. So I leave you with that framework. I'd say, sort of everyone agrees that this, God has no body, God is not physical, God is not located, confined to a place. God is all-knowing, perfect, and singular. Okay. Questions, comments? This is like huge ideas I'm like throwing out here. Okay, this is like a disgusting, superficial summary of 3,000 years of of tradition. But I'm trying to be fair. Okay, what is the Torah? Okay, so we talked about this before at the beginning of this syllabus, but it's sort of worth coming back to it, right? The Torah is God's, the product of divine revelation. Judaism believes in two Torahs fundamentally, a written Torah and an oral Torah. Okay, the written Torah is what we call the 5 books of Moses. Okay, that was given by God to Moses, and the oral Torah also was given, at least in its core essential kernel, also was given to Moses, and it's the explanation for what the written Torah means. I guess defines Judaism as distinct from any of the other, Jewish sects that were existing in the time of the Second Temple and whatever. Like our form of Judaism believes in the oral Torah alongside the written Torah, and they both are divine. What is the content of the oral Torah? There's a range of opinions here. On one end of the spectrum, God gave Moshe the written Torah and a very, very comprehensive oral Torah that had all the details, or most of the details of what the written Torah means. And later on, thousands of years later, the rabbis of the Talmud kind of shared a little bit of the derivations or connection. All the argumentation the Talmud is just about, and the Midrashic literature is about connecting the oral Torah and the written Torah, but the oral Torah was comprehensive and existed before. The written Torah, of course, existed before. And so the Midrashim, the Drashot, those interpretations, it says this, but it means that. And that's just to tie the two together. So, for example, sorry, this is a slightly urgent note. Do you know what time it is? Some of the shuls in the hospital Um, okay. Written Torah, right? So when the written Torah says, "Don't boil a kid in its mother's milk," and the oral Torah says, "Well, works it out," and that means you can't cook any dairy and meat together, or eat dairy and meat that were cooked together, or derive benefit from dairy and meat that have been cooked together, and that's all. That's what the Torah means. That's a Torah level prohibition to do those things, right? Because the Torah says 3 times, "Don't boil a kid in its mother's milk." Okay, so according to this one end of the spectrum, that those rules were also given to Moshe by God, okay? And all of those derivations in the Talmud are just connecting something they already knew to something they already knew. The other end of the spectrum is that God gave Moshe the Torah and maybe a few rules and a few other additional details, but mostly just the written Torah, and then said, okay, now you go figure out what this means. And so really the oral Torah is more like a charge or a mandate to interpret and discover the meaning of the written Torah. And so those derivations, those drashot, are actually genuinely creative ways in which a new meaning unfolds. So the oral Torah, that process, that as the Talmud comes to a close, we no longer make drashot. We don't derive new rules from the Torah anymore. We sort of work with the existing drashot that are found in classic rabbinic literature, and we develop them, explain them, study them. Okay, so that's written Torah and oral Torah. That's like an important, element of rabbinic Judaism, and really distinct again from like some of the other various forms of Judaism that existed in the ancient world. Questions, comments on this?
I had a question.
Yeah.
At least as far as I understood, there are like over time different versions or oral versions sort of passed along and needed to be reconciled with like Babylonia and another version. How did that come together? I'm sort of interested in how people handled that.
Yeah. So, okay. So, the oral Torah, so this was like one of the earlier. If you go back to like one of the like early, the earliest, the first few classes in this series, you can find me also attempting to answer this question. But basically, the oral Torah is passed on from teacher to student for generation after generation after generation. As it does, it expands, and different versions, different opinions multiply. And then around the year 200, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, let's collect and edit and kind of organize the oral Torah. And the result of that endeavor is what we know as the Mishnah. So then once that editing, organizing was done, the Mishnah itself then became the subject of study. And so once you have the Mishnah, then, well, how do we know this? And why is that true? And here's this other source, which seems also ancient, but isn't in the Mishnah, which seems to contradict it. How can we reconcile? And that, like the Mishnah set the agenda for the next 300 years of conversation. And so there were 2 major Jewish communities, one in Roman Palestine and one in Babylonia, Sasanian, wherever, Persia, and Persian, whatever. Yeah. And those conversations continued for several generations, right? Centuries after the Mishnah is edited. And so in Palestinian Talmud, otherwise known as the Jerusalem Talmud, is kind of put together, I don't know, year 300 or 400 or so. And then the Babylonian Talmud, the year 500 or so. That's just the product of several generational centuries of these conversations and further study and explanation, explication of the Mishnah. And so there's 2 communities kind of, engaged in this process at 2 different places with some ties back and forth. And ultimately, the Babylonian Talmud became the more authoritative, the more studied, version of the Talmud, mostly having to do with sort of historical contingency, because when the Arabs came in the 7th century and conquered the Mediterranean world, they put their capital in Baghdad, which was right near where all of the Jews were living in in Iraq, and where those Talmudic academies, where those early yeshivot were, right in the area of Baghdad. And so they had the global empire with trade routes, and they could send questions and answers back and forth very easily. They could send fundraising money back and forth very easily. And so those Babylonian academies became the sources of Jewish law and Jewish guidance for the whole world, until eventually in the West, in North Africa, Tunisia, and Libya, and Spain, bit by bit, you had Jewish communities realizing, oh, actually, we can study the Talmud ourselves and figure out what it means ourselves, and have to keep sending messages back to Babylonia to get answers. And that's the rise of medieval Jewish scholarship in the West, in the Rishonim. Okay, those early scholars. Okay, that's what set them apart. They stopped sending questions back to and being deferential to the traditions coming from Babylonia itself. Okay, that's 3,000 years of history in 5 minutes. Okay, is that an okay answer to your question? Is that?
It was very fascinating. Yes, that answered my question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay. Mitzvah Torah study. I think that's also really different, really important. Okay, and Torah is not just a source of instruction, a source of what to do. It's not just law, right? In that sense, it's also like the study of Torah is like a major intellectual and spiritual pursuit for Jews. And that's also something you wouldn't, I don't know, that's like, I think really sets, Jews apart. I think it's like a unique feature of Judaism, that the study of the law, the study of the text is itself a religious devotion, not just for a handful of scholars who have to know the law to apply it, but for everyone, right? One way to understand it, right? If the Torah represents God's will and God's instructions, then to study Torah, I'm like, my mind is approaching God's mind, trying to understand it and discover things about like God's will for the world. So that's like a spiritual endeavor. Okay. If I eat and say a blessing before and after, I'm serving God with my mouth and with my body, with my stomach. If I study Torah, I'm serving God with my mind, which is like the highest capacity we have as human beings. So I'm using my most refined part of me to serve God through Torah study. So I think that's a real feature of Jewish life. I think, especially like Orthodox Judaism, I think exemplifies this ethos of like really devoting a lot of resources, communal resources, into Torah scholarship, that really every Jew should make time in his or her day for Torah study. Every Jew should have ambitions to study Torah, to learn. And as a community, we invest a tremendous amount of money in educating our children, and then also sponsoring and fostering scholarship among adults as well. And so that's Torah study. Okay, next, letter C. Roles of Jews and non-Jews. Okay, so here's my version of this story. If you read the beginning chapters of Genesis, God has a relationship with all humanity. Every human being is created in the image of God. All human beings are the children of the first, people. No one's better than anyone else. God cares about everyone. But the first people disappoint God, and then the the generation of the flood disappoint God, and God, restarts things with Noah. And then a few generations later, things go bad again. They build a big tower and they're rebelling, and God isn't happy with what they're doing. And so God scatters humanity. Everyone has a different language. And in this way, at least all humanity are not going to be corrupted by the same corrupting influence. They're never going to all go bad at once, because they're all divided and scattered and with different cultures and languages. And at that point, the Torah narrows its focus on just one family, on Abraham and Sarah and their children, and the rest of the Torah is the story of that one family as they become a nation, the rules that God gives to that family. That's us. So I would say, I don't know what, God's ongoing relationship with other human beings. I don't know about that, because the Torah is not a book about that. The Torah is about God's relationship with my ancestors and our people and our responsibility to God, and other people, I don't know, what God's relationship with Chinese people, that's not what this book's about. God's relationship with French people, that's not what this book's about. This book is about God's relationship with the Jewish people and our responsibility to God. So I don't know. So I would say it's just beyond the confines of my religion, right? On the other hand, I would say no, at the end of the day, I think the same universal expectations that are laid out in the earliest chapters of Genesis don't go away, but God's method of shaping the world maybe and having that relationship shifts. God's gonna, this one family seemed to get it right, and God gave a Torah then to that family when they become large enough to be a nation. In that way, hopefully, if we as Jews do our job well, we can demonstrate to the rest of the world, this is what a community looks like, this is what a nation looks like when it when it lives out, according to this model of this model of what we're supposed to do. And in that way, that can influence the rest of humanity. The Torah uses the metaphor of we're a mamlechet kohanim, or a kingdom of priests. So what does the Kohen do? The Kohen, the priest in the Jewish conception, serves in the Beit HaMikdash, serves in the temple, and is, God's representative, on earth, and being a conduit for God's blessing, and also is the people's representation for God, serving the Beit HaMikdash and kind of offering prayers on behalf of the rest of the people. So that's the metaphor, right? Of so we Jews are like that for all humanity. It means we have to be God's representatives on earth, sort of living an example of a godly life and what it means to live according to ethical monotheism, and also humanity's representative for God, that our mitzvah, our prayers are on behalf of all human beings. I think it's important. So we have 613 mitzvot. Like, that's a special thing. We don't expect others to have those mitzvot. There's no God doesn't demand that of them. We don't think everyone needs to become Jewish or should become Jewish. But our Judaism should be broad enough to that we should care about and sort of recognize that every human being is ultimately of equal concern to God. Right? That's my understanding. Questions, comments? Okay. A lot of big ideas. Okay, that's fine. Moving on. Okay. Reward in this world and the next. So what do you want to say about that? I think the most the most emphasized position, the most conclusive position on this position about this topic in the Talmud is the position that there should be no expectation for reward or punishment for mitzvot in this world. And so we can't have no expectation of justice, of divine reward in our lifetimes in this world, but we ultimately believe that, either after our death or in the end of time, there is reward for good and punishment for bad. There is justice, so that's sort of ultimately, but we can't expect to see it, in our lived reality, right? The Torah seems to be describing a reality where there is a more direct, kind of reward and punishment, but we can't expect that, right? I guess it happens. That's why it's in the Torah, because that's the Torah presenting us with a depiction of what justice looks like. But the Talmud tells us you don't expect to see that around, and you don't, right? We see wicked people who prosper, we see righteous people who suffer, and schar mitzvah hayal maleka, the Talmud says, right? There is no reward for mitzvah in this world. We can't expect there to be justice here. Okay, we have to wait for it for elsewhere. Okay, individual and community. We're just like okay.
I had a question.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Sorry, I just find that interesting because the system of laws and having a council to oversee things and court system seems very focused on being fair and justice and reward and punishment accordingly. And then it also seems like spiritually, or at least in modern times, the idea of reward and punishment is more abstract. So I'm kind of curious on how those two things, I guess, can both be major aspects of everyday life. Does that make sense? That's kind of an abstract.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. Look, yeah, look, I'd say if you according to a more rationalist understanding, the mitzvot are, fit together as part of a system that promotes good living, okay? And a nation, a world, observing mitzvot is going to have, a well-ordered, tranquil, peaceful society, okay? And that in turn will enable individuals to, pray and to study Torah and to engage in philosophical contemplation of God and to merit the world to come in that way through our, through having that tranquility, okay, and peace of mind, because we're not, chasing each other to, steal their horses or whatever, okay? So that's like a reward of, I wouldn't say that's a reward, I would say it's a consequence, okay? It's a consequence of mitzvah observance is that sort of a well-ordered life and a well-ordered society and peace and tranquility, okay? I think there are others who also see maybe there's some spiritual power of a mitzvah, like I'm doing God's will. I'm sort of connecting to some like spiritual power when I do a mitzvah. That's certainly a more mystical trend that sees that. And so if that's the case, then you might imagine some sort of like goodness coming from that. And there might be, some, sort of metaphysical reward. Or you might see some good following from those. But I would say, but the Talmud reminds us you can't expect that. Okay, you can't expect that, and yeah, and if you expect that there's going to be reward and justice, and you're going to be disappointed. Right? It's a lot of a lot of very good people suffer, right, without any. I don't think we're not supposed to figure out what they did to deserve that suffering, and I don't think that's what we're supposed to do, and so and therefore we I think we sort of just have a more like a not philosophical, like a stoicism or a maturity to recognize, okay, I can't expect to get what I deserve, or this person didn't get what they deserve, but they will one day, just not in this earthly existence, in this life. All right, moving on briefly. Individual and community. So a couple of different ways to I think as you've seen, right, if you've been, visited our shul a few times, right, and if you've had any interaction with Judaism, it's not a religion meant to be practiced on an individual level, right? Like Judaism is meant to be practiced, I guess, within the context of a household, and then even more broadly in the context of a community, for communal prayers and Torah study and communal life, and providing hospitality and those shared communal experiences. That's why, it's, for example, part of the conversion process, right? If I say like first step, pick a community, come visit our shul a bunch of times, start coming a couple of weeks in a row to see if you like this particular community and you want to join like this particular community as opposed to any other, right? Because that's part and parcel of the process, right? Is to acclimate socially into a community. Some people are extroverted, some people are introverted. It's okay. You don't have to. It's not a. You can live, a Jewish life apart, but there are mitzvot you won't be able to do. And I think it's really not ideal. I think it's a lonely existence to try to live as a Jew without being like embedded really thickly in the life of a community. We also see that the Torah was given, for a collective to we're not supposed to like as individuals like figure out what the Torah means. We're supposed to observe the Torah together. I think that's like because there are mitzvot in the Torah that need interpretation. Like when do we observe the holiday of Shavuot? It's like subject to interpretation. So we can't all observe the holiday on a different day. We have to observe it together. So there must be some mechanism for collectively reaching a decision, deciding what the verses in the Torah mean, deciding how we're going to observe these mitzvot together, so that we all celebrate Shavuot, at the same time. That seems clear from the Torah that like it wasn't given to individuals; it was given to like all of us together to like strive together to live up to this mandate that's expressed in the Torah, and are sort of held accountable both as individuals and as a community. That's also like the Torah makes clear that like there's the punishment and reward collectively, right, for our collective ability to like live in the land according to the mitzvot of the Torah. And also each individual is accountable, for your own actions, and each individual should have ambitions to, love God and study Torah and observe mitzvah, right? That's you should have individual ambitions, but also understand that the Torah was given to us collectively to try to work through together what it means, and we're sort of held accountable for that as well. Okay. Men and women, and here you have again like a range of perspectives, just even within Orthodox Judaism, a range of perspectives. I'd say here's one way to think about them. Most mitzvot in the Torah are equally obligatory for men and women. All the prohibitions of almost all the prohibitions of the Torah, most of the positive mitzvot of the Torah, men and women equally have to observe those mitzvot. There's a small number of mitzvot which are gendered. Men do some, are obligatory for men, a few are obligatory only for women, or different ways for women. And then you have a question of whether you want to like make a big deal of those mitzvot or not. Okay, do you emphasize what we have in common and say, okay, a few mitzvot we have differently, so let's do those differently, but basically we're the same. We're Jews trying to observe mitzvot, or do we say, no, these mitzvot that about which we're different, like that must mean something. Let's try to build a philosophy of difference, of like what it means to be a Jewish woman, what it means to be a Jewish man, based on those mitzvot where men and women are different. And let's build a philosophy of that around that. And I'd say that's the question. I'd say in the modern wing of modern Orthodoxy, we tend to de-emphasize the differences, to emphasize the sameness, to try to minimize as much as possible the different religious experience of men and women. And so where we acknowledge that there are, the Torah says, or the Talmud says, men do X, women do Y, we said, okay, so we'll of course respect that, but we're not going to make a big deal out of it. And in the less modern wing of Orthodoxy, they sort of say, no, like women's role is kind of, that we can construct from these halachic differences. And so public prayer and public Torah study and are going to be, and certain public rituals are going to be male, and female rituals will be more domestic and less in that sphere. And so I say that's like a trend, that's not a trend, that's like the spectrum of way to like understand, sort of how we fit. I think they both have validity. They both seem to, I think, work. And they both have strengths and weaknesses, I would say. Okay. Evolution and creation. Okay. I don't think like Orthodox Jews need to have a problem with acknowledging an ancient, universe and the evolution of species. I don't think that's not inconsistent. The scientific understanding of evolution and an ancient, billion-year-old planet is not inconsistent with the account of the creation in Genesis, because we don't read Genesis literally. We don't read any Torah verse literally. We read the Torah verses in the context of the oral Torah, right? As we just talked about, we read the Torah in the context of this interpretational tradition. And I'd say that, the verses, those opening verses in Genesis particularly, are like really hard to understand on a plain sense meaning, right? Like what on earth does it mean? Rashi says these verses to cry out, explain me, okay? Like meaning you can't understand them on a plain sense level. So you have to understand them in some other way. And so I don't see any reason to be bothered by a literal understanding of Genesis that may conflict with with the evolution or, age of the universe, because why would you want to read those verses literally anyway? So, there are some Orthodox Jews who nonetheless have these types of hangups. I don't think that's really necessary. I think, the Torah is not telling us how to create the world. It's not telling us geology. It's telling us about values. It's about, humanity's place vis-a-vis God and vis-a-vis the world and vis-a-vis other human beings. That's what those chapters in Genesis are telling us, not how to create a world in 10 easy steps. Okay. Mashiach. So here also is a range of, Mashiach, the Messiah. So on a very basic level, God promised King David that, you're going to be, my king, and your descendants will be my king forever. And so once the descendants of King David were no longer ruling as king, so we sort of had to wait for this, this return of the king. And Mashiach literally means anointed one, right? The kings of Israel were anointed. And so we're waiting to once again have an anointed king from David to fulfill God's promise to David that the kingship would stay in his family. And that's one opinion in the Talmud, that there's the times of Mashiach would be no different from our times. It's just that we'll have a king again, and we'll have independence, and the other nations won't rule over us and subjugate us and oppress us anymore. But everything else will be the same. And all those fantastical prophecies about peace and a transformed world, and that's not just talking about the world to come. That's talking about some end of time thing, not merely the coming of the Messiah, which again is going to be a very sort of physical, sort of similar existence to what we have now, but we'll have a king and won't be oppressed by the nations. And the other opinion, no, all those prophetic visions, those were describing the Mashiach times when the world and the universe will be radically transformed and things will be really different. And the Messianic King will be part of that and will inaugurate that really transformed way of being. So who knows? We don't really know. I think it's more important to focus on, serving God and doing mitzvot and learning Torah and sort of being conscientious and not not serving for the sake of reward, not serving because we want, Mashiach to come. We're serving God because it's the right thing to do, because it's the honorable thing to do, because it's what we're commanded to do. It's our duty. It's our responsibility. It creates a life of meaning. It makes the world better in a concrete way, and it allows us to live a life of value and meaning, and to pass it on to our children and within our communities. And I think that's enough. I think to keep most of us really occupied and motivated and focused. And God promised Mashiach will come. So yes, Mashiach will come, and when he comes, the world will be radically transformed. It won't be, and the reward in the world to come will that'll be. There's a story of in hundreds of years ago, it's hard to get lulav and etrog, the 4 plant species we hold together in Sukkot, right? In Eastern Europe, it was hard to transport. These are tropical fruits, to transport them to Europe, and it was really hard. In Eastern Europe, it's about so. One year, there's only one etrog, okay, that made its way to Lithuania, and it was offered to the Vilna Gaon, great rabbi in Lithuania, wanted to buy the only etrog that was in the whole city. And the man, a very wealthy man, bought it, and he said, I'll sell it to you if you give me your reward, your spiritual reward for doing the mitzvah. If you sell that to me, I'll give you the etrog. So the Vilna Gaon made the deal, shook hands, took the etrog, and was so excited and so happy. I said, why are you so happy? He says, now I know that I'm really doing the mitzvah with pure motivation, because I sold my reward. Right. So not only we're not doing mitzvah for monetary benefit, we're not doing mitzvah to be, that God's going to give us money or health, or, Mashiach's going to come and we're all going to be so happy. No, we're doing mitzvah. It's the right thing to do. Even the spiritual benefit, he didn't want that either. Okay. We're doing the right thing to do because it's the right thing to do. It's maybe a little austere, for some of us, but I think I find it's very, very powerful as a model of that kind of code of honor, right? Of doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Okay. We have made our way through the syllabus. So I'm going to stop recording. This is going to be the last of these classes I do here at the shul, but you have 10 years of recordings on YouTube, so you can you can watch me age in real time as you look at the old videos and as we go through the syllabus. But I'm still around, so please reach out with questions and comments. Hope to see you in shul, and if I can be helpful, assistance to any of you, please reach out directly, and we can schedule some meetings to follow up. And again, hope to see you in shul. Okay, let me stop recording. Oops, sorry. Here we go.